Israel says it has struck several Hezbollah sites in southern Lebanon in an act of self-defense. It follows hundreds of rocket and drone attacks by Hezbollah after one of its top military commanders was killed last month.
The Israeli preemptive strike came in the early hours. Huge explosions rupturing the morning quiet across southern Lebanon. The IDF says this attack was an act of self-defense and was the result of precise intelligence that Hezbollah was about to launch a retaliatory assault following the assassination of their top commander in Beirut in late July. The targets were missiles and rocket launchers, with Israel saying it had neutralized the worst. But this is unlikely to be the end of the matter.
What happened today is not the end of the story. Hezbollah tried to attack the state of Israel with rockets and drones early in the morning. We instructed the IDF to carry out a powerful preemptive strike to remove the threat. The IDF destroyed thousands of short-range rockets, and they were all intended to harm our citizens and our forces in Galilee.
Hezbollah, for its part, says it did manage to launch hundreds of missiles and rockets at nearly a dozen Israeli military bases, releasing this video complete with triumphant music. In the north, families and their pets were woken to the sounds of war as the country's Iron Dome defence system blasted the fire out of the sky. For this assault, the militant group is also claiming victory.
We were ready after the funeral of Commander Mohsen. Our fighters, our weapons, our plan, everything. We just had some details of which targets we will hit, which I will talk about later. But we are ready.
The cross-border exchange of fire has continued throughout the day, albeit at a slower pace. And as you drive through the border areas, it is unnerving. We are just a few kilometers from the Israeli border, and the towns and villages here in southern Lebanon are deserted. They're like ghost towns. Most people have fled to safer areas, as they have too across the border in Israel. Now, people here that are remaining and across the rest of the country are fearful with this latest escalation about what comes next. Is this another step closer to an all-out war between Hezbollah and Israel?
Joining me live is independent journalist and author of The Palestine Laboratory, Antony Loewenstein. Hi there, Anthony. Thanks for your time today. So let's talk about the intention, when Hezbollah started these attacks on Israel. What do you think it's, exactly what they said, which is to target and, of course, gain revenge for the killed commander?
Look, there'd been a cold peace, if you can call it that, before October 7 between Israel and Hezbollah. Of course, they're not friends. There was a war in 2006. And since then, there's been a unhealthy, frankly, cold peace. Fast forward to October 7, and there has not been a ceasefire in Gaza for 10 plus months. Israel and Hezbollah have been sort of trading blows back and forth for basically 10 months. Very shortly after October 7, Hezbollah started firing almost in solidarity with Hamas into Israel. Israel, of course, has fired back much more into Lebanon, killing large numbers of people. This is clearly a situation where the issue is not simply Israel and Hezbollah. It's far bigger than that. It's partly about the role of the US and Iran. And what Hezbollah has said for months and months, as Iran has, frankly, until there is a ceasefire in Gaza, this will continue. A ceasefire in Gaza will de-escalate. It's not going to make everyone love each other. It's not going to be utopia. But the current situation is so utterly unhealthy, where you have people in the northern part of Israel can't live there. People in the southern part of Lebanon have been displaced for months and months and months. Hundreds of people have been killed. And there needs to be a ceasefire in Gaza, which Israel continues to refuse to do, to abide by. And the US, finally, is refusing, in my view and many people's view, to put necessary pressure on Israel for that ceasefire. The ceasefire in Gaza is what will at least de-escalate the situation, which is so needed.
Now, we saw on the weekend that so far we don't have a deal, a ceasefire and hostage deal.
No.
When do you think we will see one?
Well, look, I hope it obviously happens today, tomorrow. I mean, I have friends in Gaza and I have friends in Israel, and the lack of a ceasefire has been devastating. I mean, let's be honest, there's 40 to 50,000 Palestinians killed in Gaza, at least tens of thousands more injured. I mean, the idea that Israel essentially is wanting, and this has been reported by the Israeli press and also sources of mine in Israel, that Israel wants a sort of permanent military presence in Gaza along the border with Egypt, but also to divide the north and the south. And as the editor of Haaretz, which is the leading Israeli newspaper in Israel, said on the weekend, what really is unspoken here in much of the Western press is Israel wants to occupy Gaza. They're not going to have massive settlements in Gaza next week, but it's step by step. Israel's been occupying the West Bank for over half a century, and in Gaza there is a massive push by Israel's far right, who are in government, to establish outposts, some kind of Jewish permanent presence in Gaza. And Hamas, and I'm not speaking for Hamas, but Hamas doesn't accept that. And in fact, Palestinians don't accept that. Many Israelis, for that matter, do not accept that. And much of the international community, including Australia, have said they do not accept that. The US has said they don't accept that. And yet, the Biden administration, including Kamala Harris, is not putting pressure on Israel, arms embargo, stopping weapons going to Israel to enforce that ceasefire. And without a ceasefire, this will only escalate.
So do you think the October 7 attacks have just formed the ultimate excuse for Israel's attacks?
Yes, I do. I mean, October 7 essentially is allowing Israel, in granting international legitimacy in the West, I'm not talking about with the public, but Western governments, to essentially do what it wants in Gaza. Gaza has been made unlivable. There are still roughly 2.3 million Palestinians living there, but anyone who sees the footage, I have friends living there, friends who have escaped, friends who can't escape, the reality there is devastation. And the idea somehow that greater escalation, that Israel can attack Iran and Lebanon and Yemen and country after country after country, and then somehow claim self-defense. The fact is that growing numbers of people do not accept that. I don't accept that, and I speak as someone who's a Jewish Australian. The growing numbers of people in my community who are particularly younger do not accept the fact that Israel's indefinite occupation of Palestine and bombardment and massacres in Gaza are keeping Israelis safe. In fact, the opposite is true. It's making Israel more unsafe the longer this continues.